They didn't ask me. That was the part that stayed with me the longest. The decision about my future was made in rooms I wasn't invited into, by people who smiled at me afterward, like nothing had changed. At first, nothing had changed, at least not visibly. My desk was still there, my name was still on the system, my access still worked. That's how it begins. Not with removal, but with permission quietly revoked. I noticed it during a meeting I used to lead. Same room, same agenda, different energy. Someone else spoke first, then another. My role shrank to listening. When I finally spoke, no one interrupted, which should have felt respectful. Instead, it felt final. They acknowledged my words the way people acknowledge weather, present but irrelevant. I walked back to my desk knowing something had shifted, not emotionally, strategically. People don't stop listening overnight unless they've already agreed to. The next weeks confirmed it. Emails that once needed my approval were sent without it. Decisions I used to influence were finalized before I even saw them. Questions stopped coming. People don't stop asking questions when they become smarter. They stop when they believe your answers no longer matter. I tested it once. A small suggestion, non-threatening, technically sound. It was ignored. 2 days later, the same suggestion came from someone else. It was praised. That's when I understood. They weren't removing my work. They were removing my presence. Most people react badly at this stage. They over-explain, they fight for relevance, they ask for reassurance from people who already decided they were done. I didn't. I needed to know why. So I watched. I noticed patterns. Who gained visibility when I lost it? Who suddenly felt comfortable correcting me? Who avoided eye contact? Power always leaks clues. You just have to stop talking long enough to see them. One afternoon, I overheard my name in passing. Not criticism, not praise, logistics. As if I were a process being phased out. Eventually, after the transition, once things stabilize, no one says those words about someone they plan to keep. That night, I stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like a witness. I documented nothing officially. I didn't need evidence for now. I needed clarity. Who decided? Who benefited? Who stayed silent? Silence, I learned, was the loudest vote. Weeks later, the opportunity I had been promised vanished. Not canceled, redefined. The role still existed, just not for me. They explained it carefully, politely, like people who wanted to feel fair. I thanked them. That confused them, because they expected resistance, they expected emotion, they expected me to reveal how much it mattered. I gave them nothing. From that moment on, I let them believe I had accepted my place. Smaller role, less influence, no objections. People relax when they think the problem is solved. That's when they become careless. And that's where part 1 ends. Not with loss, with permission. Permission they thought they had. Being overlooked isn't always a loss. Sometimes it's cover. Once people decide you're no longer a threat, they stop guarding their words, their plans, and their mistakes. That's when information becomes cheap. I was no longer copied on everything, but I was copied on enough. Enough to see timelines that didn't line up. Enough to notice names appearing together too often. Enough to catch contradictions between what was said publicly and what was agreed privately. They weren't efficient. They were comfortable. One person in particular stood out. Not the loudest, not the most ambitious, the one who benefited without being visible. Every decision that sidelined me seemed to pass through their calendar, not their authority, their access. That's important. Power doesn't always sit at the top. It sits where information converges. I adjusted how I behaved. I asked fewer questions in meetings. I spoke last, or not at all. I nodded more than I argued. People mistake silence for agreement. That mistake would cost them. Outside of work, I began rebuilding something I had neglected: leverage. Not complaints, not alliances based on emotion. Skills, visibility elsewhere, independence. Every hour I was no longer needed internally, I invested externally, quietly. Here's something most people don't understand. Revenge isn't about harm. It's about irreversibility. I wasn't planning to confront anyone. I was planning to become unreplaceable somewhere else. Meanwhile, the internal cracks widened. Deadlines slipped. Responsibility blurred. Decisions were delayed because no one wanted ownership. I used to absorb that pressure. Without me doing it, the system revealed its weakness. Someone joked once, "Things feel slower lately." I smiled. They started checking in on me again. Casual messages, unnecessary meetings. Not because they missed me, because something felt wrong. I stayed consistent, helpful but distant, available but non-committal. I gave them just enough to stabilize things, never enough to fix them. That's a delicate balance. Behind the scenes, my exit was taking shape. Not dramatic, not sudden, clean. Options lined up, timing calculated. I didn't want revenge to look like revenge. I wanted it to look like gravity. The person who had quietly benefited from my absence finally slipped. They contradicted themselves in front of the wrong people. Nothing major, just enough to plant doubt. I didn't point it out. I let others notice it. That's another rule. If you expose someone directly, they defend themselves. If you let others discover it, they isolate them. By the time leadership realized something was off, they were already late. They started asking for my input again, more urgently now. I gave it, selectively, not because I wanted my position back, because I wanted them to depend on me one last time. Dependence is a dangerous thing. Not for the one who depends, but for the one who believes it's permanent. By the time they leaned on me again, they didn't realize how narrow their options had become. That wasn't accidental. The first real test came disguised as urgency, a deadline they couldn't miss, a decision no one wanted to own, a situation that required experience they no longer had in the room. They called it temporary support. I called it confirmation. I stepped in, not aggressively, not heroically, professionally. I fixed the surface problems quickly, just enough to stop the bleeding, but I left the deeper issues untouched. People assume competence means total repair. It doesn't. It means knowing what not to fix. After that, the messages increased. More meetings, more reliance, more phrases like, "We'd be lost without you right now." I never corrected them. I just watched how fast comfort returned. Here's a hard truth most people never learn. When people wrong you quietly, they fear exposure. When they get away with it, they fear loss more. And loss is easier to engineer. I finalized my exit during that period. Contracts signed, timelines locked, no overlap. I didn't announce anything. I waited. The person who gained from my sidelining tried to reassert control. They overreached, pressed too hard, spoke too confidently. That's what happens when someone confuses access with authority. Leadership noticed, not dramatically, subtly, and subtle shifts are the ones that last. I was asked casually what my long-term plans were. That question only comes when someone realizes they might not own the future anymore. I answered honestly. I'm exploring options. Nothing alarms people like calm honesty. The room changed after that. Suddenly, my availability mattered again. My calendar was respected. My opinion was valuable. Too late. My final contribution was deliberate. I delivered something critical, well executed, clean, irreplaceable in the short term. Then I stepped back. No warning, no emotional distance, just absence. That's when panic shows its true face. Not shouting, not anger, confusion. Who handles this now? Who knows the context? Who can replace that judgment? They looked at each other. No one answered. I resigned a week later, brief, polite, unemotional. They asked if anything could change my mind. I said no, and meant it. I didn't burn bridges. I didn't explain myself, because explanations invite negotiation, and negotiation implies uncertainty. I had none. The aftermath reached me indirectly. Projects stalled. People blamed each other. The person who benefited early was quietly reassigned, not punished, removed. That's how organizations admit mistakes. I didn't celebrate. Revenge isn't loud when it's done right. It's quiet. People think the worst moment is when someone leaves. It isn't. The worst moment is when nothing happens afterward. No confrontation, no explanation, no closure. Just space. After I was gone, there were attempts to reframe the story. There always are. Small narratives floated carefully. They were already drifting. They wanted something different. It was mutual. Those stories aren't for outsiders. They're for the people telling them, because the mind hates unresolved guilt. Silence is intolerable to those who believe they control outcomes. And I gave them nothing but silence. Weeks passed. Then messages started appearing. Casual ones at first. Hope you're doing well. No question mark. That's not care. That's testing the door. I didn't reply. Then came relevance attempts. Forwarded articles. Thought of you when I saw this. Updates on things I no longer belonged to. That's not connection. That's regret wearing politeness. Here's what people don't understand. When someone wrongs you and benefits from it, they expect anger. Anger confirms importance. Anger invites dialogue. Anger gives them a role. Silence removes the stage. Internally, the damage spreads. They replay decisions. They reconsider conversations. They question moments they once felt confident about. Not at all at once. Slowly, like pressure behind glass. The person who replaced me lasted less than 6 months, not because they were incompetent, because they were exposed. They were placed in a role built on borrowed credibility. Once the source vanished, so did the illusion. I heard all of this secondhand, and that's how I knew it worked. Real consequences don't travel loudly. They arrive fragmented, unconfirmed, uncomfortable. Meanwhile, my life stabilized, not dramatically, cleanly. No chaos, no retaliation energy. no obsession with outcome. That's the real win. People assume revenge is about teaching someone a lesson. It isn't. It's about withdrawing access to your skill, to your calm, to your reliability. Access is power, and I revoked it. The last message came months later, longer this time, apologetic in tone, vague in responsibility. That's important. People apologize vaguely when they don't want to name what they did. I didn't reply, because apologies without clarity are just self-soothing rituals. Closure is a privilege, not a right, and I didn't grant it. People talk about power as if it's something you take. It isn't. Power is something people give you access to, often without realizing it. And once they do, they assume it's permanent. That assumption is where they fail. What this taught me wasn't how to win. It taught me how people lose. They lose by underestimating quiet competence. They lose by mistaking silence for submission. They lose by believing systems matter more than the people holding them together. I didn't outsmart anyone. I outweighted them. While they focused on optics, I focused on structure. While they protected narratives, I protected options. While they rushed to feel secure, I waited to become free. Here's the part no one likes to hear. If you need to explain your value, it's already gone. If you need to demand respect, you've lost leverage. If you need revenge to be seen, you're still attached. I refused all three. People asked later if I felt justified. That's the wrong question. Justification keeps you tied to the past. I wasn't interested in being right. I was interested in being finished. The people who wronged me will always carry uncertainty, not because I hurt them, but because I disappeared without permission. No final argument, no emotional release, no clean ending. Just a gap they couldn't close. That's what silence really does. It forces people to live with their decisions without the comfort of resolution. I didn't walk away angry. I walked away clear. Clear about who speaks when power shifts. Clear about who panics when access disappears. Clear about how fragile confidence is when it's built on someone else's patience. The lesson is simple, but most people are too emotional to use it. Don't rush to react. Don't announce your departure. Don't correct people who underestimate you. Let them finish their story.